First of all, I'd like to apologize for not uploading for quite a while. I had some medical issues that seems to have cleared up now, but I'm still kind of on the lookout for. Secondly, I'd like to thank everyone who watched my Megaton Musashi review. I was honestly surprised by how many people watched it and how many people subscribed because of it. Anyways, with that out of the way, I'd like to begin. It's been about 2 years since my Sands of Time review, and I did say that I would review the other games in the trilogy. Well, here it is. Prince of Persia: The Warrior Within, released in 2004, is the developer's attempt at an edgy and dark sequel to the Sands of Time, while Prince of Persia: The Two Thrones, released a year after, are the developer's attempts at undoing most of that edge and going back to its roots. With both of these games, the series creator, Jordan Mechner, had no involvement whatsoever, as he was busy with the script for the Sands of Time film. And according to a Wired article, he was not happy with Warrior Within, but was more pleased with The Two Thrones. I just wanted to say, some of the footage for Warrior Within may look like crap. That's because I was messing with OBS's recording settings and, well, I didn't notice until very recently how shit it looked. Other than that, everything should look fine. The Warrior Within. After the Sands of Time, in which the prince managed to undo the entire events of the game, some time passes where the prince takes part in a turn-based tactics game on the DS, and a game that was made alongside the Sands of Time film. During all of that, he is being hunted by the Dahaka, the Guardian of Time, who wishes to kill the prince in order to fix the timeline. Because of all this, the prince becomes a lot more hardened, aggressive, and edgy, which is completely understandable, though I can see why some might not like this change. To stop the Dahaka, the prince travels to the Island of Time, where the sands originated from. Along the way, the prince's ship is attacked by Shadi, some goth babe with her ass hanging out. After the battle, he crashes onto the island, occupied by sand monsters, the Dahaka, and Kailina, the femme fatale of the past. There are two endings in this game, and which one you get depends on whether or not the prince picks up the last weapon of the game, of which you need to get all health upgrades to get, and is also the canon ending. Regardless, they both end with the prince's home being attacked. The only difference is that in the non-canon ending, the prince is aware of what's happening, while the canon ending has the prince too busy getting his dick wet to notice. Also, it reveals a certain dark figure. Who is this figure? Well, you're about to find out in The Two Thrones. Directly after The Warrior Within, with Kailina telling the audience that they all got the non-canon ending, and that she was banging the prince on the ride home, the two arrive in Babylon's waters, only to be attacked by the invaders, the Scythians, if you're privy to ancient history, of which I am not. With Kailina captured, the prince makes his way through the war-torn city before finally reaching her. There, the prince meets the vizier once more, for the first time, who kills Kailina, awakening the Sands of Time. While the prince escapes, with a pretty gnarly body mod, something awakens within the prince. Something dark and edgy. The Dark Prince, who is kind of the prince's id, who is aggressive, snarky, and wants nothing more than to kill. With early onset schizophrenia in tow, the prince also meets up with Farah, who is more or less the same as she was in the first game. The story of Warrior Within is a lot more gritty and dark compared to the Sands of Time. I quite liked it, even if the edge didn't really feel that edgy for today's standards. Although the prince's plan to fix everything is a bit far-fetched, even for me. The Two Thrones eases up on the edge that the Warrior Within had, in fact going pretty much back to the Sands of Time, even having a similar plot delivery with Kailina narrating the game's events and the prince's thoughts. Since these games came out a year after each other, it should be noted that they are very similar. But they do have some gameplay changes worth noting. With Warrior Within, you can tell that they're trying to be a bit more experimental with the formula, most notably making the game's world be more open. The combat system is greatly expanded upon, with more combos and moves for the prince to use. The prince can now switch between using a single sword and dual wielding. With a single sword, the prince can grab enemies and either toss them, take their weapon, or execute them in a sick fashion. When dual wielding, the prince's moveset expands, gaining a wider range, more damage, and he can throw his secondary weapon at the enemy to either stun or decapitate them. However, the stolen weapon also has limited durability. Compared to the Sands of Time, combat is, in a sense, a bit more difficult, as the enemy AI is a lot more aggressive, from what I remember at least. Also, boss fights are more involved in this one, especially the final bosses, compared to the Sands of Time where the Vizier died in like 3 hits. There are no more sand clouds that will give the prince premonitions and let him save, as those are replaced by water fountains. Now there are portals that will let the prince travel between the past and present, and every time the prince enters a new one, he will get a new power or a sand tank. Platforming is pretty much the same, maybe a little more difficult as there are more traps laid about in tight positions and certain areas are quite dark. Although it could also just be because my skills have gotten worse since I last played the Sands of Time. With the game world being more open, you are able to explore the island wherever, but this is mainly just to collect anything you might have missed, such as health upgrades or artwork from chests. As you progress through the game, the prince will have chase sequences with a Dahaka, who will send the prince to oblivion if he is caught, but is stopped by walls of water. Not a major feature, but one thing I really like is that you can fast forward through cutscenes and even skip them, which makes it a lot quicker to get back into the action. In the Two Thrones, the developers go back to the Sands of Time formula, going back to a more linear game, but still maintaining the combat system of Warrior Within. In this game, there is the introduction of stealth mechanics. When enemies are around, the prince will enter a crouch to avoid alerting the enemy. However, if he happens to do anything to alert his presence, like breaking objects, the enemy will go into alert mode, and if they see him, they will begin combat. This can be avoided by using a move called Speed Kill, which can either be used from a vantage point or behind the enemy. When the screen begins to vignette, pressing the Speed Kill button will cause the prince to make contact. Once the animation starts, when the prince's dagger shines, pressing the main attack button will cause the prince to damage the enemy with swift strikes, before finally finishing them off. If you press the button too early or too late, the speed kill will fail, forcing the prince into combat. At least at the start of the game, when he gets the Dagger of Time again, you can just rewind to try again. It's not really necessary to do, but there is a greater incentive to do so, as you can kill enemies in about half the amount of strikes. Plus, there are areas with enemy spawns, which also acts as unlocks for the prince's time powers, where if you don't kill the main guard, he will activate the spawn point, causing a lot of enemies to appear, and you'll have to kill them all in order to stop it. The platforming in this game has been further expanded upon, with the prince now being able to use his dagger to stick onto plates on walls and act as levers, jump diagonally with shutters, and also has a Sam Fisher-like wall split. And after the Vizier awakens the Sand of Time, the prince will gain a new form called the Dark Prince. More powerful and combat-oriented, Dark Prince has a large chain whip he can use in combat to finish enemies with ease, giving off some heavy God of War vibes, which makes sense since they both did come out in the same year. Not only for combat, the chain can also be used to help Prince expand his platforming, extending his wall runs, grabbing out of reach bars, and pulling out platforms from walls. However, the Dark Prince also gradually loses health, but can heal by absorbing sand orbs. He also has speed kills in this mode, but this time all you have to do is mash the speed kill button. The Dark Prince is weak to water, and whenever he walks through a body of water, he will revert back to the prince. Boss fights are further fleshed out, with a bit more problem solving to defeat them. There are also racing sections where the prince rides on a chariot to reach his next destination, of which there are only 2. During these sections, the prince can ram enemy chariots into obstacles to crash them, and if enemies get on, they'll get knocked off by a slash of the dagger. While Warrior Within allowed the ability to skip cutscenes, the Two Thrones doesn't, or at the very least only allow you to skip certain cutscenes. I only found out that you can skip cutscenes retrying the final boss, but I remember trying to do it with other ones, and it wouldn't let me. Also, there are collectibles, apart from health upgrades in the form of sand credits. These are mainly used to unlock artwork, but you unlock them all by finishing the game, so I have no clue what other uses they have. Overall, I enjoyed both games, but from a gameplay aspect, I think I prefer the Two Thrones. The Warrior Within had a lot of great ideas, especially with the combat, and had a lot of potential. While it also is meant to be a longer game, sometimes it felt like there was quite a bit of padding to make it longer, especially at the end where you have to backtrack through the entire island. Though I suppose it doesn't help that this game crashed on me like 7 or 8 times. With the Two Thrones, while I like that they went back to the Sands of Time formula, it did feel like they were playing a bit too safe with this entry. Though I suppose I don't really mind too much, because I did like the speed kill mechanic, the further fleshing out of the platforming, and the Dark Prince made combat feel quick yet satisfying. In Warrior Within, there is a nice contrast between the past and present, with the past having colourful and lively environments, while the present shows the islands as desolate, greying, but still quite pretty. As I said earlier, there are quite a few areas where it is unfortunately very dark, which can affect platforming quite a bit, so you'll have to up the brightness and contrast of either the game or your monitor. A lot of the designs have an edge to them, especially the weapons. Models look a little less cartoony than the Sands of Time, and the CG cutscenes have a nice balance between stylized and realism. In the Two Thrones, the environment aesthetics are a lot more aligned with the Sands of Time, while also taking a note from the character designs from Warrior Within. Though the CG cutscenes try to be a bit more realistic with the characters, which unfortunately kind of gives them an uncanny valley look. The audio mixing in Warrior Within is not great. The voices are audible, which is nice since I remember having a hard time hearing some of the voices in the Sands of Time. The sound effects can either be very soft or incredibly loud, with the soft ones sounding rather flat. There are subtitles, which is always nice to have, especially since there is a bug with one of the cutscenes where the voices are just muted. Also, there are times where music should be playing, but doesn't, and vice versa. Speaking of the music, in Warrior Within, it leans a lot more on the rock, metal side of things, with a slight Middle Eastern twist compared to the Sands of Time, which is a lot more orchestral leaning. Hell, Godsmack plays during the credits. The voice acting is pretty serviceable. Robin Atkin Downes, who plays as the prince in this game, does a great job in portraying a more rough and aggressive prince. And while it is a bit of a shame that Yuri Lowenthal wasn't the prince, it was for the best considering the tone of the game, which even Yuri himself agreed with. Kailina, played by Monica Bellucci, does a fine job, though at times it seems like she was having difficulties hiding her Italian accent. What I thought was a nice touch was the Dahaka speaking backwards, and if you rewind time, you can hear what he's saying. Disrupt the timeline, no further. In the Two Thrones, the audio mixing is a massive improvement, though some sound effects still sound a little flat. There are no subtitles, which is annoying, because the fact that they gave us the option in the last game, then to just take it away will make no sense to me. But at the very least, the voices are easy to hear. While the voice cast has all been replaced, Yuri Lowenthal is back as the prince, who kind of tries to imitate the gruffness of Downes' performance. Personally, he doesn't really quite match it, but is a lot more fitting when he reverts back to the Sands of Time prince. Kailina is no longer voiced by Monica Bellucci. No surprise there. But her new VA, Sarah Carlson, does a nice job in giving her a sultry tone that will pleasantly grace your ears. Thera's actress, Joanna Wasik, who I think retired at this point, has been replaced by Helen King, who gives her more of an Americanized accent, kind of like an action hero, which kind of makes sense, as she does have more of an active role, plus 7 years have passed since the Sands of Time. But her original voice was, and still is, very charming to me. The Dark Prince is voiced by Rick Miller, a Canadian comedian and actor who, looking at his IMDb, was the voice of David Seraph in Mankind Divided. Originally, it seemed that the Dark Prince was meant to be voiced by Robin Atkin Downes, which makes a lot of sense and would have been very fitting. Though since the only thing I could find was an IGN article, it'd probably be safe to assume that Miller was always going to be the Dark Prince. And he does a really great job, as he gives the Dark Prince a trickster-like tone, sounding playful yet devious at the same time. The music goes back to a more orchestral soundtrack, leaving the metal behind with Warrior Within, though I do think it would have been nice to have a metal track for the Dark Prince's combat. Warrior Within, well, still an interesting game that I liked, crashed quite a lot. I suspect that it might have been due to the widescreen patch that I was using, or maybe because I wasn't using compatibility mode. But I mean, it worked fine, but it would crash every 2 hours or so, which unfortunately kind of made it a bit frustrating for me to play, especially by the end where it did force me to restart a few sections quite a bit. Though I can definitely see myself being nostalgic for this entry if I had gone to play it when I was younger, but I can also kind of see how some of the changes wouldn't have been too welcomed by the player base, since this is quite a departure from the Sands of Time. With the Two Thrones, I had no crashes whatsoever, which objectively puts this up pretty highly in my view. While I enjoyed my time with the Warrior Within, I did have a more enjoyable time with the Two Thrones. While it was nice that they went back to form with the Sands of Time, it did kind of feel like they were playing it a bit safe, as I said before. though this is probably what some fans would have wanted anyways. Overall, every game in the Sands of Time trilogy has been a pretty enjoyable experience. I mean, sure, they all have their strengths and weaknesses, but all of them are still great games to play. The Sands of Time has a great story and atmosphere, though a little basic in terms of gameplay. The Warrior Within greatly improved upon the combat. The environments look nice, but is technically a mess with how often it crashed for me. The Two Thrones incorporates both great aspects of Sands of Time and Warrior Within, and acts as a fitting end for the trilogy, but it does feel like a bit of a retread of the first game. These games can be gotten for pretty cheap when on sale, as they go for about $2 to $3 a game. Although I know a lot of people aren't happy with Ubisoft right now, so alternatively, I'll just say this, there is no DRM with these games, so take that however you will.